We have evidence that certain entities did fancy stuff in our election, therefore positioning the advantage of a certain King Mango above that of actual constitutional republic and democracy. That is the story for today in our hypothetical scenario. In this reality, who actually holds them accountable? And the reality to this is that the Constitution is a social contract that is basically an honor code. However, our actual branches don't actually respect this honor code. So in this reality, we have an incomplete constitution that has very terrible guidance as to fixing this. In this reality, I think this is why we've been stuck and depending on foreign entities because they've positioned rules and regulations that are much more sustainable to this end. However, the question becomes, how does the United States fix this when we don't have a guidance as to how to fix it? An example is how what Yahtzees did wasn't actually illegal. It's ethically illegal. However, it wasn't actually illegal to do this because there was no international law or international court to actually have jurisdiction over things like this. So in that reality, how could you hold an entity accountable for something that wasn't illegal? And we are facing this because if there is a lot of scenarios concerning fancy stuff that stemmed from, say, social media misinformation that was positioned through the head of a social media platform like Cybertruck Body, that wouldn't necessarily be illegal or be considered as election fancy stuff in a normal reality. However, when there's such a significant breach of various countries and our own, that's when it becomes much more serious. And in fact, it actually is a threat to our peace and security, not only here, but to the entire world. Now, the problem with this is that the timeline for when the international community has to take care of restoring peace and security through holding these entities accountable can be different than what us as Americans actually need. So that can be months, that can be years, when we have days to weeks until we cannot go back. In Iran, 1979, a conservative ideological shift occurred that they have not recovered from. Women now get unalived for going outside of the norm. And prior to that, they could dress however they want, but not anymore. And that's the reality that we're going into every single day that he is allowed. So I'm going to redirect his question to say it's not important who is it who gets to implement this, because reality, we don't have that authority to actually know who specifically it is or how it's going to be done. It's just that it has to be done because the consequences of allowing for this to keep occurring is so significant. Consider this executive order sounds so like official, right? It just sounds like a good idea, but then you read it and what is it? It's literally a purging of certain Biden members where he is literally revoking the clearance of a list of members. This is a purge of the administration, and it's wild that we would allow it to continue every single day or decades that we have to use litigation in order to restore what we have lost, the harm that he has done in this reality. I think for us as Americans, it's less a question of who is it and more a question of when, and that when it has to come fast. And that reality, our point is, what can we do to escalate that? I'm not talking about accelerationism, but it's not like we have time. We don't have months, we don't have years. This has to be resolved as soon as possible. And consider this: if the Joint Chief of Staff can independently act if there's a constitutional crisis, ask yourself, is there a constitutional crisis right now? Yes, virtually. However, is it affecting the infrastructure? Is it affecting the stability of the country? I mean, yes, on a political and constitutional level, but is it affecting the economy? Is it affecting society? Is it affecting politics? Is it affecting the constitutional channels? No. And as a reality, then if we pretend like everything's okay and we just leave our frustrations online, then the ones up there, the Joint Chief of Staff, can pretend like there's no crisis going on. In that reality, we have to provoke that reaction from the highest ranking member who can actually solve this constitutional crisis. And it won't happen by us just waiting for them to actually give resolve. If he only acts when there is a constitutional crisis, then let's give him a constitutional crisis. Is this certainly how South Korea triggered the impeachment of their president? It wasn't because their politicians said we should do this. It's because South Koreans said, no, you're going to impeach him and you're going to be in there until you do it. And then eventually it happened. What are we going to do? What is going to be our provocation of the highest ranking members to actually solve this? Now, today's report should shed some light as to whether or not we will have any resolve, and if there's nothing of substance, then we have to consider how we are going to show up and how we are going to force resolve. Because if we wait on political willingness, every single day he is removing things. So it's not a question of who, it is a question of when, and it is a question of us making sure that we're capable of mobilizing and creating SOS in order to force that reaction from our highest ranking government, who are not in obedience to Donald Trump, but in obedience to the Constitution, that is the military, specifically the Joint Chief of Staff. And if you tell yourself, hey, that's a Trump appointee, Google who it is. It is not a Trump appointee, at least not right now. But we have people in government who can implement it. But they're not seeing any constitutional crisis because it's all pretty quiet. Yeah, he's coming for us all. And Joe Biden pardoned his family. He knew he was going to purge. He left, and I was the first one purged on day one. Did Joe Biden pardon me? Did Joe Biden pardon my communities? No. So we don't have months. We don't have years. I'll tell you that much.